Ukraine has been the global innovator in drone tech in this conflict, and they seem to have made a tremendous leap forward in the last 4 to 5 months. We're going to talk about why and just what Ukraine is bringing to the battlefield and how it is changing the game for the conflict. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to look at 3 different pieces of drone tech that Ukraine has rolled out. The first of which is an absolutely wild, so wild I don't think I can even show you the videos here on YouTube. A flamethrower drone. I don't know what else to tell you. Specifically, it's using a thermite payload, right? Effectively turning its UAVs into flamethrower weapons. Now, this is footage, the first publicly shared footage of this weapon was by the 108th Territorial Defense Brigade, showing drones actually flying over a narrow tree line. You can see kind of some of the grainy footage here, in which you can see a narrow tree line has had a streak of what we now know to be thermite sort of deposited into it. And this is, as we know, these narrow tree lines are really, really difficult for Ukraine to clear because Russians, again, thanks to overhead cover, Russian forces can build trench lines or even conduct assaults, and it's difficult for Ukrainian airborne weapons like drones or even artillery to sort of dig them out of these positions. In fact, in a lot of ways, this war is literally being fought tree line to tree line. So by attaching a thermite payload to this drone, it's able to drop thermite onto these wooded areas. And so, if you are a member of combatvetnews.com, which, by the way, guys, that sale is still going on. So if you want to become a member, you can just use promo code Labor Day 24, get access to any one of these tiers. You'll get 10 to 20% off. And any one of these tiers, though, is going to get you access to those uncensored combat videos. Again, including my reaction to this very one, right? We do a deep dive analysis of this thermite drone, and we see just how it functions, and it's so much crazier than I can talk about here, again, because of YouTube's terms of service. So this is also the best way to support the channel, by the way. You may have noticed that I don't have a lot of sponsors that even want to be a part of this channel because I cover conflict. So you guys, the audience, are my sponsor. So I appreciate all of you that do. Okay, so the rumor is that this thermite drone was actually deployed near Pokrovsk, where Russian forces are continuing their advance. And these thermite drones are likely not alone. They're not a single one-and-done kind of weapon. Instead, what they're likely doing is a few things. First, they are literally burning away foliage, sort of like Agent Orange was used for in the Vietnam War, where you would have Vietnamese forces using dense foliage in wooded areas as cover. And so along key routes or along key like banks of rivers, the U.S. would just drop this foliage to essentially remove, right? It caused all the foliage around to shrivel up and die, meaning that it couldn't be used as cover or concealment. And this thermite is going to function similarly in these tree lines, right? Because thermite burns so hot and so long and is so hard to extinguish that even green foliage that otherwise might not burn will actually potentially catch fire. But more significant is that thermite burns hot and for a long time, and it burns through things. In fact, when I was in the military, they trained us to use thermite grenades if we couldn't recover a vehicle and we had to scrap it to prevent it falling into enemy hands. We were actually trained to put a thermite grenade on the hood and pull the pin and allow it to burn straight through the engine block. That means that, of course, if you are a Russian soldier and you're in a dugout with overhead cover, right, and thermite starts burning through your roof, you're going to have to get out of there. Even worse, if you have a bunch of, say, anti-tank mines or rockets stored in that bunker, those things are going to get cooked off, and you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So it's all a way to make these tree lines just less friendly to defending Russian forces. Now, of course, that's not the only tech we've seen Ukraine roll out here. The other piece, the second of 3, is a airburst, right? A do-it-yourself airburst. This is a post according to a Russian UAV developer, right, who has recently obtained what he calls a captured UAV, a captured Ukrainian UAV. And he says, hey, This had a standard drone bomb, but the fuse had an interesting trick. It had a laser rangefinder to measure the distance to target. He said anyone who has used a laser tape measure knows what I'm talking about. And this is, again, a laser tape measure is incredibly simple. Let's see how much it would run you to get a laser tape measure. Yeah, you can see that at Home Depot, a laser measure is going to run you about $50, right? You can get a cheap one, pocket laser distance measurer, for $21 at Walmart. So for using a $21 piece and, again, a little bit of software, you can actually set an electronic fuse to go off if you have if it reaches a target. Now, the appeal, of course, of an airburst is that that it creates a cloud of lethal debris that sort of rains down on you, right? The same thing that made those cluster munitions so powerful, that is how an airburst can work. And we've seen a lot of times these drones, Russian troops will scatter when they realize drones are nearby, and they'll be too far apart so that the drone operator can only pick one Russian to try to wound or kill. But an airburst means you just get centered over it, and it creates the cloud that rains down and can really be lethal against personnel, particularly personnel in the open. So this kind of tech, again, a really step up in sophistication, but not even that much of a step up in cost, which is itself kind of incredible. Guys, I do want to take a sec before we talk about the third drone and say that you guys should subscribe to the channel. If you haven't, it's free. It's an easy way to support me, and it tells the YouTube algorithm that the content I'm making and that I'm one of the legitimate creators around the Ukraine war space. So if you haven't, please hit that subscribe button. Now, the third one is actually a counter drone. And this is using, again, a piece of tech from even before the Second World War, a balloon. Now, you may know that the OGs know that in Iraq and Afghanistan, forward operating bases were often protected by balloons, right? Large balloons would be sent high into the sky with high-powered cameras that could look around and function as an eye in the sky. That meant that even insurgents that might try to sneak close to the base's walls would be detected from potentially miles away because there was always someone monitoring the eye in the sky. Now, these balloons, of course, are also being used to essentially fulfill the same function, but for drones. And instead of an eye in the sky to visually see an enemy, they instead rely on electronic surveillance systems to sort of sniff out not just where drones are operating, but to detect the drone operators, to find where the signal is originating from, right? The system known as the azimuth is actually a term for calculating the point of origin and the direction that something is going. And this azimuth was developed by a Ukrainian tech company that was meant to find the operator of the drone, right? Using passive signal intelligence equipment to locate radio frequency signals emitted by drone operators to control the aircraft. Of course, then it gets some telemetry and data and can spit out an azimuth in real time, the drone operators can launch either a counter drone strike or an artillery strike against that drone operator, killing the problem at its source. But right, they say the azimuth can actually operates best at over 1,000 feet, making it pretty hard to actually shoot a hole in. And detection range can be extended to 37 miles with accurate triangulation of the target's position. Right, to do triangulation, of course, you got to have two of them running at different points. Right. Because the same targets be triangulated at a distance of 15 to 17 miles, comfortably inside of, notably, this would cover you basically your entire artillery range. So, they say it has a really tiny radar signature, meaning it's tough to detect with radar or electronically, but the problem is with this is that even as this detection system gets rolled out, the Russians in turn are experimenting with fiber optically controlled drones, which emit no radio signal from either the drone or the operator, meaning this kind of tech may already start to be outdated. But again, wire-guided munitions have their own problems, and they're very, very expensive. But one of the things I want, that's kind of the meta I want people to take away from this is really a statement or a piece that had come out recently. And it's going to get its own video, but I wanted to just tie it back here. That former head of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Miley, right, a storied Special Forces officer, and Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, have recently collaborated on an op-ed. And what they say is, listen, the U.S. military is not going to fight and win the wars of the future, right? They said, and the reason is what we just saw here, right? They say technology is transforming warfare, and the U.S. is not prepared for it. Because what do all these pieces of tech have in common? They're cheap. They're cheap, but they're game-changing. And the U.S. military, we do the opposite, right? We take very expensive pieces of equipment. And this is my take. And again, I'm going to do a deep breakdown of their article, but this is the core, I think a core aspect of what they talk about, is that the U.S. military, right, we build a super carrier. We can build 12 of them. Each one's going to take about a decade to build, right? They're obviously being built concurrently, but they are so expensive that if they were to be destroyed, they're irreplaceable, right? And like the Russian Black Sea Fleet, once it's in the bottom of the Black Sea, it's donezo. It's defeated for the duration of the war. You contrast that with a Russian FPV drone. If you take out one, there's 50 more following you. Look at the Shahed, where Russia sits there and they launch 100. And they say, we know 95 of them are going to get destroyed. But the 5 that get through make it all worth it for us. And they cost a tenth of a combat aircraft. And this kind of math and this kind of innovation is something the U.S. military is not prepared to do, right? We're talking about from ideation to battlefield execution. Some of this tech is developed in days. They're 90-day projects, right? They're on the timeline of a high school science project, and they're on the budget of a high school science project. The difference is that the execution and the iteration, if they work, you're going to see a gazillion more of them. If they don't work, you're going to see them fall by the wayside, right? And this kind of free market iteration is something that the U.S. military fails at, and the U.S. tech and startup world thrives at. Look, pretend it's 2003. The U.S. military has just rolled into Iraq, and Google is a small, tiny little search engine that's an idea in someone's basement. Look at how the next 20 years played out for both of those forces. The U.S. military took 2 massive L's in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Google is the most valuable enterprise most valuable private enterprise in human history. So, who do you think should be teaching who the lessons here? Just something to think about, food for thought, something to chew on. Well, I get you guys out of here. Huge thank you to our Colonel tier members, Bill Collier, Robin Colburn, Gaius Marning, Eugenia Cuesta, Chris Gorsuch, Franzicarius, and AL90. Huge thank you to our Lieutenant tier members. Could not do this without you guys. And, of course, huge thank you to all you guys that come by and subscribe. It's free. You should do it. Hit the button. See ya. Cheers.